right, so the next question is how do we shape this kind of community? What does it take to develop the kind of community in which disciples are going to be made? This know, believe, live reality will start to take place. So page 2 on your notes there, we call this, I told you, like missional community life. It's not a program of Selma. It just is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus who's making disciples of Jesus, doing it life on life, life in community, life on mission. So I put there on your paper kind of three marks of missional community, of the kind of community that will shape and make disciples who can make disciples. So first of all, kind of mark number 1 is a gospel-fluent culture. A gospel-fluent culture. A missional community is birthed and sustained by repentance and rejoicing in Jesus. So the whole first half of Gospel Basics was all about exploring what the good news of the gospel is and what it looks like to repent and believe it. That has to be the very fuel for everything else. So the question of like how do we keep Jesus at the center of the community? How do we make a community that's not about a leader or a book study or something? We do that by developing a gospel-fluent culture, a culture that's kind of constantly asking the question of who is Jesus and what has he done? We're constantly coming back to that. So missional community, like it's going to be birthed by people whose lives are growing in what I would call a gospel awe, a wonder, a delight. Like, man, isn't Jesus good? And here's my sin. Here's the places that I don't believe it. Here's where I failed this week. But look at all that Jesus is. Look at all that he's done for me. So we use the phrase, I think, similar to what Gabe shared earlier, but of gospel plus safety plus time equals transformation. So here under gospel, I would put gospel truth plus in a safe environment over the long haul. That equals transformation. Right? So how do I grow? How do I change? How do I become a different kind of person? I need lots and lots and lots of reminders of who God is and all that he's done for me in Jesus. Lots of conversation about that. Like I said, when our community gathers, it almost is like this joke at some point where it's like, Steve, are you going to ask that awkward question now? But it's almost always an awkward question around like, hey, where have you seen your need for the good news of the gospel this week? And then next week I ask it like, hey, what aspect of the good news has been really good news to you this week? And then the week after that, it's, like every time I'm like asking some question to put the good news of the gospel at the center and then ask us to basically repent around it. Is that right? That's basically what we do. No, I really have 2. Here's the thing. You can ask that kind of question from any text of Scripture, right? Because it's just the question of who is God and what has he done? What would it look like if you believed that? Just ask that question. Like that, we ask some form of that question every week. Man, what would be different in your life if you fully believed that you were declared righteous? Well, man, I'd like these arguments that I get in with my wife where I'm like trying to defend myself, I wouldn't need to defend myself anymore. Oh, really? Like, did you guys get in one of those arguments this week? Tell us about that. That's what we do around the table. And it's an environment that's safe to do that in. Like it is welcomed. Like we want to hear about your sin. We want to hear about your unbelief. Not because we want to like condemn you, but because we know like if you can open up that gap and you can see like, hey, I don't believe this here, then somebody can tell you like, hey, let me remind you of the good news. Let me remind you of all that is yours in Christ. Right? So gospel plus safety, and then just walking it out. We'll talk about this thing of rhythms in a little while, but what we're talking about, change doesn't happen overnight. It happens over the long haul. So some regular rhythms of being together, talking about Jesus together, like over time in a safe environment, transformation happens. So mark number 1 of gospel community or missional community is that it's got to be a gospel fluent place. It's got to be, the good news has to be central. Okay, second mark is a disciple-making mission. So missional community is formed for the sake of disciples making disciples. That's the purpose. In other words, we don't want to gather a community together just to study the Bible. We don't want a Bible study. Do we want to study the Bible? Yes. But we're talking about forming a kind of community, shaping a kind of culture, a kind of people, rather than just like, what do we do when we get together? That make sense? So what's the big purpose? Like, why gather people together? Why eat meals together? Why meet? Why share life? Because we are disciples of Jesus who are learning how to make disciples together. Matthew 28 drives us. This is why we have missional community. This is why we gather. This is why we do what we do. So you start gathering people together, not because it's the program of Soma, but because you are tasting the goodness of Jesus and you want others to taste it too. Does that make sense? Yes, Steve, it does. Great. And then the third mark is a committed community. Somebody said that when we were talking about it, but missional community is a people who are committed to life and mission together. In other words, you're able to look at each other in the eyes and say, like, I'm committed to you. I'll walk with you. Like, we're in this together. So that's very different than, like, I show up at your house once a week for dinner. It's like, hey, I'm for you. Like, we even sometimes learn to use this word love. I love you. It's awkward most of the time when it's used, which is, I think, tells a whole bunch of story about our lives, right? Like, well, why can't we look at one another and say, I love you, and I'm for you, and I will walk with you? Right? So, gospel-fluent culture, on mission to make disciples, right? So both of like you becoming a disciple, but also helping others to make disciples, and then a committed community. Community that says, "Hey, I'm for you. I want to share life with you. I want to learn how to be a disciple with you together." So this right here, this overlap, is what we would call missional community. Right. So a community on mission with the gospel. What has to happen to cultivate that? What has to happen to cultivate a gospel-fluent culture, a disciple-making mission, and a committed community? Yeah. Okay. So you got to make some asks, some invitations. It's good. Simple, right? What else? Yeah. I don't know where to put that. So there's a lot of things that you got to leave. You got to check out of Facebook for a while and check into real life. You got to be willing to turn off the TV. You got to say no to a lot of okay things, some of them just not okay, to say yes to being in community together, orienting your life around a new mission. What else? Yeah.
I think you're going to have to be spontaneous and informal to see each other that often. It's going to need to be like just knocking on their door, showing interest without being invited, calling them like, we're going to the park now,
Yep.
meet us.
Yep. Totally.
I don't really have anything planned, but we can make those be tentative.
Yep. It's good. Yeah, it's great. It's great. What else? So some spontaneity, some openness, some invitations into just normal stuff together. Yeah.
I think you have to also be willing to, at some point, divide and
Oof. We use the word multiply, Rebecca.
yes, you can't just go on gathering people
Yep.
and have it be
Yep.
that life on life. And I feel like if you don't do that, there's not a place for there's not a
Totally.
place for modeling.
Yep.
Which would be, I think, what we have missed
Yep.
in like the whole program-oriented church or whatever.
Yep.
So I think, you have to be willing to
Yep.
grow.
Yep. And there are seasons where we intentionally say, actually, our community is just forming and we don't have space for other people. But by and large, what we want to say is like, hey, this is open. You are welcome here, because it forces everybody to go like, then we all have to take responsibility for it. And then every single, I mean, that like every single one of us should be asking the question of like, could I help shape a new missional community? And when? Like we're having that conversation with Brian and Cass right now. Like, is it time? Is it time to send you to multiply? Because there are people in their lives and there are people in our lives that like literally we don't fit around the table anymore. We don't even fit in our house anymore if everybody shows up. It's crazy. And then you guys we're going to send to Africa. It will reduce the numbers ever so slightly. Yeah.
I think you have to be prepared, like, and embrace, like, swallowing your pride, like,
Mm.
see parts of your life that you don't necessarily like to advertise.
Yep.
They're going to see you at your best in your words.
Yep.
You're truly out in your community, like, you'll see, be prepared for that, kind of embrace it to a degree.
Awesome. Sounds great, doesn't it? I mean, who wouldn't want to be a part of this?
Kind of related. You know what I was thinking about, like willingness to be vulnerable and enter into vulnerability.
Yeah.
Know and be known.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's even harder to like know others in their weakness. Like you're sharing this yuckiness or hurt or whatever,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to enter into that with you, but I want to. You know.
Yep. We have lots of those awkward conversations around our table. Like, thanks for sharing that. It is welcome here. Like we're just like, I don't know what to say right now. Like what's happening? Like, all right. Anybody else? We'll pray for you. Yeah. Totally though. Yep. It's you find out your how limited your relational capacity really is in community. Like you actually don't know how to love people. Like that's the reality. Like you don't. I mean, you don't even know how to love your spouse very well. But there's somebody that you've chosen, right? And you like you spent some time getting to know them before you committed to this thing, right? Like community, you're with a bunch of people that you didn't choose. Jesus chose and put them together. And like, I don't understand what you're saying. Being in your presence is not life-giving to me. Like, and that's my problem. Not. Does that make sense? Like that shows diminished relational capacity in me. Like, and Jesus has said, they'll know your disciples by your love for one another. You're like, oh man, like they're not going to know that we are his disciples by how great my preaching is on Sunday, because like, it's not bad actually. And people come and we sing, and like they'll know you're my disciples by the caliber of your worship services. No, by how well you love one another. All right, somebody else had a hand up.
I think like the I love you, like being able that comes from like acting on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the service act
Yeah.
and sacrifice.
Yeah, totally.
Word we love. Like
Yeah.
I mean, even people say like being able to be spontaneous, like not our favorite thing. Like,
Yep. Totally. And we have a good excuse though. We have 5 kids, so spontaneity, you can't do that with 5 kids. Which is just a total excuse, right? But like that's where we end up going, and it feels like, bring other people into this is going to be it's just hard, and we don't want to make the sacrifice often. Yeah. Are you raising? No. You're raising? Yes. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. 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 Yeah, when even if you think about the family missionary servant identities, like some communities do family really well. And it's awesome. And some communities do mission really well. Some do service really well. But no, like a holistically shaped disciple is going to be growing in family missionary and servant identity. It's good. So if you look on your notes there, here's the challenge of talking about what we feel like God's called us to do, is that it is so much easier to help you figure out what to do when your community meets on Tuesday nights. Like I could give you some, like, here's what you should do. Here's a good question to ask. Here, study this gospel resource and reflect in life. Like, I can tell you those things, but if we're going to talk about this whole life thing, then there's it starts to get a little nebulous. Like, the question is, okay, what do I do, Steve? A gospel fluent culture, a committed community, like making disciples together. Yes, I'm in. Like, now what? Like, what do I actually do? So one of the ways that we've gotten after the kind of like, okay, but what should we actually be doing together is this idea of rhythms, which is like basically looking at what are the things that you already do with your life and what would it look like to do those things as family, as missionaries, as servants. What are the normal rhythms of everyday life that all of us are engaged in all the time? And how do I view those and do those in light of who Jesus has made me to be? Right? So if you look on page 2 of your notes, you'll see some key postures or rhythms of life that really these are things that happen in every culture, every place, every time. And we just want to ask the question of how do we engage in this everyday stuff of life in light of who we are now in Christ? Right, so the first one is eat, and we'll just take that because it's pretty simple. Let me ask you this: How did Jesus use meals? Well, okay, it's good. What do we see Jesus doing with food? He what? He did some fishing. Good. What else? He's with people. He's always eating with people. Yep. Good. What kind of people does Jesus eat with?
All kinds.
Right? It got him in a lot of trouble, actually. I mean, the Pharisees called him a glutton and a drunkard. You don't get accused of that unless you eat and drink a lot. But he's hanging out with gluttons and drunkards. That's where he's spending his time, prostitutes and tax collectors, right? So he used meals as mission. He used meals to bring people into community, especially in that culture, but it's the same in our culture. Like, who is around your table is proclaiming a story. Does that make sense? Like, if you have, for Jesus, if you have tax collectors around your table, you are saying, Jesus as a rabbi, as a spiritual leader, as a teacher is saying, these people are included in the kingdom of God. That's big. Then he's eating meals with his disciples. He makes like the key way that we're to remember the good news of the gospel is a meal. Right? If you can think of the whole biblical story in light of a meal, right? Like what got us in trouble in the first place? Eating. How does Jesus save us in this meal and how we eat? And then Paul says, everything that you do, whether you eat or drink, do it all to the glory of God. Like, your salvation gets worked out around a table, around food, around meals. All right, so think about that. So Jesus is like radically doing something radical with food. Like, what would it look like for us to eat as family? Like, if we believe that we are adopted brothers and sisters as family, how could we use food, how could we use our table to live into that reality? Yeah.
Share what we have with people around us.
Share meals together. Steve, how do we do this gospel community mission thing? Eat together. You have like 21 opportunities at least every week to be family together. So like, I mean, for us, it's like we carve out one every Tuesday night. We eat together as a missional community. Like that's one of our key rhythms, but it's not the only meal we share together. Right? So as family, you're going to just share meals. Yeah, Jeremy.
I was thinking of like say your cousins are in town from like out of state or something. Like what opportunities you take to like eat with them.
Yeah.
That was different maybe than talking to the person who lived across the street from, right?
Sure.
I mean, but like, does it need to?
Hmm.
We think of like our actual like cousins or aunts and uncles as like
Yep.
looking for an opportunity to visit.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, in some ways, you're talking about You know, it's hard to write on a whiteboard. Prioritizing, like, right? Okay, so I've got this committed community. What do I do with them? Like, prioritize a couple meals a week together. Right? Like, if you would just say, we're gonna have dinner together every Tuesday night, and then we're gonna have one other couple or family or person from our community join us for another meal during the week. You will begin to shape this missional community thing. Yeah.
Something that I've kind of gone through and gone to is like I work in a gym and there's not a lot of like Jesus loving people in the gym, but inviting them to come to my house for a barbecue or to come to dinner,
Totally.
like hey, we're gonna talk about Jesus afterwards. You can stay or you can go, but like food, yes, I can do
Food,
that. That's
yep,
comfortable.
totally.
There's no pressure.
Yep,
So I just find
yep.
that like there's a lot of room and freedom and space in being
Yep, yep.
yeah, like you said, that from that following
Yep, just invitations. Like you will live as a missionary here if you will just invite some of those people from the gym to a barbecue. And just what if you just did it with some sort of regularity? Like every season of life, one of the questions Jamie and I ask is like, who do we know that doesn't yet know Jesus? How do we prioritize getting time with him? It is almost always, well, we're going to try to have dinner with them every other Thursday. Or something like that. Super simple. You gonna add something? No? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah, Emily.
back to family. My family was involved or is involved in foster care, and I think like the idea of being adopted into a family
Mm,
and like sharing meals is something that not a lot of actual like biological families
yeah.
do, and so then to have these foster kids in our family and just spend time together
Yep.
provides such a idea of like belonging and
Yep.
identity
Yep.
that like you're part of us.
Totally. Yep.
Sharing what we have with
Yep.
you and we want you to be here.
Yep. Do you hear what she's saying? Like, so many people did not grow up sitting around a table with a family. Do not know like what it's like to be asked questions around a table. So tell me about like, how did you get to Spokane? What's your family like? Like literally, like I don't know if this goes here, but sometimes this is what it feels like. Like around the table, reparenting. You're like, I don't know what you're saying. Reparenting. That's what we feel like we're doing around the table. Like, in light of the goodness of our Father, who's adopted us into his family, we share meals. How do servants of Jesus eat? I mean, think of Jesus' wedding at Canaan. That's some serious service, right? Like, how many 100 gallons of wine did he make? Like, how do servants of Jesus eat? Does that make sense? How does being a servant shape the way that we share meals, eat together?
Maybe like not rights, but like
Totally.
you know when you feel just like oh, but this is our family time or whatever, and just being like, well, Jesus, is that what you want us to do with our Tuesday night? Like
Yep.
you know when you feel kind of protective over your time. Like,
Totally. Yes.
Like to cut your
Yeah.
steak in half.
Yep. Or I mean, just like if you're going to share meals, you're going to have to increase your food budget. Like, and the gluten-free allergy, this and that and whatever. Like, that's part of the family and servant identity. Is we like when we're sharing meals together, so everybody contributes. Like old-fashioned potluck, like that's a servant activity. Awesome. All of us are having to learn how to cook gluten-free stuff. Or how to have, we had a couple forever that are vegetarians. Like, it's so hard. Like, a soup that was made like intentionally vegetarian, but then somebody used chicken stock in it. Like, the vegetarians are like, this is really tasty. Like, chicken stock doesn't have chicken in it, does it? Oh, God. Like, what just happened around it? Like, and then they just put the spoons down, like, so bad. Like, but it's a learning process. We're figuring out, like, yeah, Jeremy.
So I think of my Aunt Mary, who she will serve like anywhere, like if it's usually at her house, but anywhere like if you eat a meal with her, she's like it's like you're at a restaurant and she's the waitress and the cook, and she's just like coming back around to everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, what can I get you? Did you get gravy with that?
Mm. Yeah.
There's 9 kids, yeah. And so another thing I've noticed with that though too is like she will not eat unless you like help.
Yeah. So that I feel like that goes both ways, right? Like on one hand, there's this reality of like when people come to our house, like we want to host, we want people to be welcomed, we want to serve people well, but we also don't want to put on a hospitality show for people. Like I really want people to learn family identity when they come in our house. So that means like, hey, do you know where the leaves to the table go? Oh, let me show you. Do you know how? Oh, the basement toys, they go in these buckets, and then next week you can just put them away yourself. Or the dishes, like right? I mean, in our house, this is what we do, right? Like, I mean, there's times where Jamie and I are in some sort of argument when people show up, so we sit on the front porch and figure it out while everybody else gets the house ready. Because we're not putting on something. We're inviting people into family. We're inviting people to learn to live as servants, not just to be served. Yeah.
If you go into like, having people over and you purpose to be like, oh, glasses are there, plates are there, like you're like by pushing them into ownership, they're taking on ownership of it. And every, little bit that you do, the next time they're there, they're that much more comfortable and it like moves things faster.
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
I find it really
Totally. Yep. Inevitably, when new people come to our community and come to meals, it's almost always, hey, thank you so much for hosting. It's been so great to be here. And my spiel is always like, we don't host. We're really glad that you're here, but this is family. Like Jesus has rescued, and then I get to share the gospel. Like here's how it connects. Jesus has rescued us into family, and we're glad that you get to be here, and we want you to be a part of the family. So you didn't do dishes tonight, but you'll get to next week. Like I want people, just like we would do here. Like when we're done here, Aaron's going to say, hey, this is what we need to do to clean up. And everybody's going to, of course, like we clean up when we're done. Well, same is true at my house. Like it's a resource that God has entrusted us with, and we all get to care for it together. Yeah.
When it comes to family, I'm kind of the opposite side of like host no host, but like the time and money thing.
Totally.
Sometimes you have to just be willing to like we want to get together, and then you just open your cupboards and figure out what you have, and you have to be like humble. Like, okay, it's peanut butter and jelly. Everybody eats peanut butter and jelly by themselves. Why can we not eat peanut butter and jelly together? Or
Yep.
potatoes. Once I asked my Facebook friends, I'm like, if I cleaned my toilet and baked potatoes and did nothing else, would you come over and visit me? And almost everybody said
Almost everybody.
Some people, you don't know if they still have it.
Yeah. It's awesome. All right, let's take a different one. How about the rhythm of celebrate? How does family celebrate? Right? This is a normal rhythm of life, right? You have birthdays, you have holidays, you have family events like weddings. Thank you. Like what? Yeah. How does family do wedding?
They all sign up for stuff to amaze you. Generous
Yeah.
giving of gifts.
That probably fits down here too. Time and money and energy, and it's good.
One of those areas where I think you have to deconstruct kind of the walls, like compartmentalism.
Yeah,
To kind of sometimes
it's good.
step back.
Yeah.
And a friend that he always tells me about his family, like the birthday party with his family, and he has some great stories about his grandparents. And I'm like, I'll go, I'll show up. Like I want to meet these crazy people.
Yeah.
And but it's like sometimes you have to be,
Yep.
yeah, you have to.
How many of you have family in town? And do you feel that? Like, well, this is family, and then there's my gospel community family. Like, sometimes you have to be the one who's willing to take the risk of deconstructing it. Like some people's families are like, why did you bring a friend? Like that's not how we do. It's not what, like, no, this is what we do. This is what God has called us into. These guys are part of my family. That's hard. That's a hard sell for some families. For like my parents, like they've totally embraced it and they love it. You know, we do family dinner with them on Sunday nights, and almost always they've invited other people to join us. Pretty great. We had a gal in our community named Rue who had a birthday, who was fairly hesitant about having any sort of birthday thing happen for her, but we used our Tuesday family dinner night really to celebrate her. Actually, Claire and John in our community put together a really cool way to bless her. So that's another one of the rhythms. But we all wrote out on little pieces of paper like what we've seen in Rue, what's true of her, whether that's like just how we've related with her, or some of us like writing like, hey, here's what's true about you and Jesus. Like just, and she's at a place where I don't know that she would say she's a Christian. I think she's probably still figuring that out. Lots of stuff dug up in her life. So we're celebrating together as family, but we're celebrating together as missionaries as well. And we're proclaiming the good news of the gospel, and John and Claire are helping us to serve her. Right? So what does it take to cultivate this kind of missional community thing? Like, just begin to think about the regular rhythms of life. How would you do birthdays together? Like, I think at birthdays are such a wonderful opportunity to look somebody in the eye and say, like, hey, here's what I love about you. Here's what I've seen God doing in your life. Like, we just don't do that enough for one another. We celebrate, we sing a song, we eat cake or whatever, but actually to like go around and have everybody write something on a piece of paper to give to this gal that then it's like this beaded thing that she's supposed to hang in her room that will like be this monument for her of this people that love her. Very much learning a different culture, very much reparenting around a table, for sure. Let's do one more rhythm. We got maybe 10 minutes. The last one on there is recreate. Right? So here I'm saying like think about how you work out. Think about how you rest. Think about how you do vacation. Sabbath. Do you have a day a week that's kind of your weekly Sabbath? Like we always think of Sabbath as like get everybody out of the way so that I can have peace and quiet. Like what would it look like to Sabbath with community as family, or to Sabbath or recreate as missionaries? For example, so tomorrow is Bloomsday, right? Like how are you going to use Bloomsday? How will you do Bloomsday as a family of missionary servants? How might you do Bloomsday as a family of missionary servants? Simple. Whether it's run it together or sit on the sidelines and cheer together. Yeah. How would you do Bloomsday as missionaries?
We're going to watch someone's child so they can competitively.
Somebody in the family or outside the family?
This is in our MC.
They're part of your community? Awesome. Totally. We'll put that over here. You might be too late for Bloomsday, but Hoop Fest is coming, end of June. Like, I don't know anything about basketball, but you could be a court monitor, right? You get like a free pair of shoes or something. It's crazy. I don't know where that fits.
Put it on the missionaries because we're going to go see family that, doesn't
Yep.
know Christ. And we're, for years we didn't spend very much time with our extended family because we were always too busy with ministry.
Mm.
And so now it's like, it's so refreshing, when we have these scattering Sundays, we go over to see my
Awesome.
parents and
That's awesome.
just love them and spend time with them.
Isn't that great? Do you hear that? Like, I think that right there is like what we're about. Like, for the love of God, skip a Sunday gathering and go hang out with some people that don't know Jesus. Like if this is what it means to be a disciple who makes disciples, then everything counts as ministry and mission. If you're just willing to do the hard work. So you guys climb all the time. If you're willing to do the hard work of thinking about how am I climbing as a family of missionary servants rather than just like, oh, I really like this thing and I'm going to go do it. Right? That's what you are doing. Right? So Jeremy and Joanna, they don't lead a missional community, but they live missional community life. Yeah. Wow. All right, I'll put that on there. There's some good ones out there. Yeah, or just invite your neighbors to come to the barbecue afterward, right? Or run it with your neighbors. Like, this is not rocket science. This is really simple. What are you going to do today? Bring somebody with you that doesn't know Jesus. I don't know anybody that doesn't know Jesus. All right, well, that's a good place to start because, like, 90% of Spokanites do not know Jesus. Isn't that crazy? They say 10 to 15% of Spokane is churched. I feel like it's generous to say that 10% of those. So 450,000 people in the greater Spokane area. How many of them don't know Jesus? All right, let's say it's 20%. How big do you want to go? There's still a lot of people around you that don't know the good news of the gospel. And even the people that are in church, probably a lot of them don't have their roots going down deep into the good news. They're living religion. They know Jesus, but they're elder brother-ish, right? There's a lot of those people around. Most of the people that end up at Soma, come out of that place of like, I'm doing all the right things and I'm busy being a good Christian and I'm dead on the inside. Like, it's drained the life out of me. And this, like, what we want is for you to be renewed in the good news of the gospel and then freed up so that your whole life can be about following Jesus and helping others to follow him. Right? So what do I do? Look, eat. Eat with open ears. Listen well when you're eating. If you ever, I don't know if you've noticed this, but people do not know how to have conversation today. Like, just go to a restaurant and just eavesdrop. I know, it's awkward, but it's super discouraging. Somebody will say something, and then somebody else will say something, and then this person will say something, but there's not ever like, really? Like, tell me more about that. Like, what? Man, what did that feel like when that happened? We don't draw each other out. We don't engage in conversation. So learn to listen, learn to ask good questions. Story. As humans, we tell stories. Right? So let's tell our stories together. Let's hear the stories of people who don't yet know Jesus. Right? There's probably somebody that you work with who you have some limited relationship with. What would it look like over the next, couple of months to try to get lunch with them once a week? And your goal is, man, I want to know what's shaped this person. So, even like for some of you, this is going to be like, you need to sit down and write out 7 questions. Like you need to be that intentional as you go into it so that you have thought, like, pull up your little playbook, like, so tell me about your mom, like whatever it takes to be able to engage. Others of you, like, this is just natural. This is just what you do. Like you love to, you have this redemptive curiosity. You just want to know people. You want to know people's stories. Like, what would it look like to share a meal with the intent of asking questions and listening well in order to hear somebody's story so that by the end of that 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever, you could say, you know what, this aspect of the gospel would be really good news to this person. Right, so you're listening. What aspect of who Jesus is and what he's done would, man, if it came home for this person, would be wonderfully freeing for them? What are they grasping after? What do they really want? And how does Jesus meet in that place? How's that sound? I mean, it's a lot of work on one hand, but it's incredibly freeing also because, there probably are some things that you're doing right now that you need to stop doing. They have no gospel purpose to them. They're not living out this identity. How many hours a week you're on Facebook? You could just stop that. Some of the things that you're doing, you just need to rethink how you're doing them. Rethink the intentionality with which you're doing them. Right? So you guys just moved into a house, right? Like, you've had a lot of people, I would guess, in there helping you do stuff. And if not, why not? What keeps us from, we're going to do this, well, hopefully kitchen remodel. I haven't talked to our community about this yet, but it's coming, and they're going to help. Right? Hopefully we'll do it before you leave. What?
I'm really good at breaking stuff.
No, that's the primary thing that I need help with.
Breaking stuff?
Yeah.
All right.
Demolition. I can do demolition. You can do demolition. Then we'll pay somebody who knows what they're doing to do other stuff. Right? So super simple. The good news of the gospel, firing on your own heart. You're driven by this gospel renewal that's happening in you where you're going, man, God is better than I thought. His grace to me is better than I could have ever imagined. I'm tasting it at a new place. That drives me into a life of I want other people to know about this. And then I'm going to start gathering some people to share life with who can help me remember and who I can help remember. Gospel, community, mission in the everyday stuff of life. Questions or comments, and then we'll take a quick break. Yeah. How do we help each other make sure that we're doing this well? Yeah. 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 I think it's lots of conversations, honestly. One thing for us as a church is we're constantly banging this drum, right? You hear it all the time. This is what we're about. This is what we're about. This is what we're about. So we're constantly banging the drum. And then we're also giving space and opportunity like this for you to wrestle with it together. But then even in our community, Brian and Cass and Jamie and I will, we've had these points where we'll stop and how are we doing? What's happening at who's where or whatever. Or Brian and John and I drove to Seattle and back to pick up a piano. Our whole conversation on the ride over there was what's going on in our community. Is it happening? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? What adjustments do we need to make? What about multiplying? That kind of stuff. Yep, totally. And it's awesome because if we're all in it together in varying degrees, then we're not saying hey, John, you're really not leading our community very well, and here's some things we need you to change. We've had that conversation. It's awful. But if it's hey, is our community living as family well? I don't think we are. Okay, so how are we going to take responsibility for that? And so here, kind of as we get to the end, what I want to press on is let's take it out of, in general, how could you or how might you, and let's begin to talk about how will you. Let's get down to some brass tacks and some intentional planning and some even thinking about the structure of your life currently. and how you might use the regular rhythms that you're already engaged in for gospel, for community, for mission. So, page 3 says, how will you live missional community life? What we've said so far is that living missional community life, it's the Great Commission. Every disciple living as a disciple of Jesus, living as a family of missionary servants, disciples of Jesus making disciples in the everyday stuff of life. Gospel power, this kind of life has to be overflow. Do you hear me? This kind of life has to be the overflow of gospel renewal happening in you. If you're going to begin to consider, how do I rearrange my whole life around the Great Commission, it absolutely cannot be for any other motivation than responsive obedience to Jesus. It cannot be because you have some vision of community that you want to make happen. You will destroy the people around you if you do that. If you come into it with community's supposed to look like this, do this, you will crush people. You'll crush them. If you come into it thinking that it's going to do something for you, fill up some sort of emptiness or lack or give you a sense of significance or power, or you will be sorely disappointed. And then again, you will harm people in the process. So the kind of life we're talking about here has to be this overflow of your own, I don't know how else to say it, but renewal in grace, where you're coming to see the good news of the gospel in ways that you haven't before. It's coming home fresh in new ways, maybe just a new season. The Spirit's kind of moving in really fresh ways, and you're wanting out of that to respond. So gospel power happening, overflow in your life, gospel purpose. You're beginning to rearrange your life, not to have a great community, but to be a disciple of Jesus who makes disciples. What you're really doing is saying, all right, what would it look like for me to make the Great Commission the kind of the central driving principle of why I do what I do? I'm tasting the good news of the gospel, and I want other people to know and believe and live in light of the good news of the gospel.